turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Andy.
Yeah.
Thanks, appreciate it. I think everyone on the call knows me. I'm Brett Nelson. I'm the Vice Chair for Education. I'm also the Director of the Ultrasound Division. I'm also a big ham. I was on the speech and debate team in high school. I like to give talks. I'm not afraid to say I like to hear myself talk as much as I love to hear others talk. So hopefully some of the things that we'll talk about today will engage things that I've learned and things that I've learned from people that are really, really good at this. And to give you a little hint and foreshadowing of what I'm going to talk about in the actual talk, it ain't doctors.
And I think I know everybody on this chat as well, but my name's Trevor. I'm one of the associate program directors here at Sinai, and I was also one of the residents here not that many, seven or 8 years ago. I was someone who did not enjoy public speaking much prior to medical school, and I've gradually enjoyed it more and more, and I've really enjoyed sort of the new era of Zoom where we get to do more than we could in person. I think that this talk is going to be interesting because we will bring some of the tested and tried and true methods of public speaking and how that combines with sort of a virtual environment. We're splitting it up a little bit. Brett's going to start things off, and then I'll sort of finish it up with the second half. But it can be interactive. I have the chat up, and if you have any thoughts and questions, let us know.
Yeah, and this is a talk that's absolutely meant to be interrupted. Please, if either of us says anything that either resonates with you or you have experiences that are similar or you have comments or questions, please engage with us and do that. One of the things that we'll mention as we go along is it's a little harder to read people's body language when they're on screen. So it is much better for you to jump in and say something when you have a question. So my screen should be loading up here in just a second. So this is a great lecture by Brett Nelson and Trevor Poor. And Trevor and I are going to be kind of tag teaming this a little bit as we go along. But I want to start off with asking everybody, so, this is that moment in the movie where there'd be the record scratch. It was like, how did I find myself here? You're about to speak in front of a large group of people. You're going to give a talk on some topic that someone thinks you know something about. So please, I would appreciate if you speak, or if you do it in the chat, Trevor can hear it, or Trevor can see it better than I can. What are some thoughts going through your head? What are some concerns that you have when you have a talk? What are some things that you're thinking about? If you're not worried about it, but you're excited about it, what are some of the things that you're planning around? Like, what goes through your head when you're asked to give a talk?
I think for me, it's how to make this not boring. Keep the audience engaged. And then one of my anxieties always with the talk is, can I hit that time limit and hit it like right on? So I'm not too short, not too long.
Yes, that's great. I have a question for you, the group. Well, and maybe you can use, and Trevor will talk about this in a little bit, but either raise your hand or use one of the emojis if you have ever been a little bit upset that a speaker went over time. And all right, so now everybody's done that. Now clear your emojis off the screen. Who has been upset when a speaker spoke for less time than they were allotted? So we're doing like the Zoom version of crickets right now. There's this old saying, and I don't know if Andy dealt with this in the Navy very much, but you're never on time. You're either early or you're late. And when you're delivering a talk, you either go under or you're over. There's no on time. So that's a really important thing that we'll probably get to a little bit more as we go. Thank you for that. Those were great thoughts. Any other thoughts, comments, issues that people deal with when they're about to put a talk together?
Yeah, how to be efficient in my slides and make sure that it's to the point, and try to kind of take off, the chaff, so to speak.
Yeah, that's great. And I'll talk about that in a moment. And in fact, as we were trying to put this talk together, we came up with this idea. Well, we didn't come up with the idea, certainly didn't invent it, but we thought to ourselves that, you know, maybe this talk should be about figuring out what your central message is going to be. What's the elevator pitch? What's the one takeaway that people are going to take away from your talk? My chair during residency, Ron Walls, would love to talk at the beginning of the difficult airway talk about how you know, we're going to have a whole day on airway work, and it was a really great conference. And he would mention that, like, you know, in any given talk, people are only going to remember one thing. And then he would always catch himself and say, but that's not the thing I want you to remember. I want to talk about airway stuff. But of obviously being human, that's what stuck with me, is that there's going to be one thing. And I'd like to focus on this central message for a lot of different reasons. And we'll go into a lot of them. But really, hopefully, this is one of the big things that you'll take away from this, is how to get to a central message, how to communicate a central message, how to iteratively find your central message and go through drafts and hone it and practice it and make sure that you've got a clear central message. And since this talk about giving a talk is by definition quite meta, the central message of this talk is having a central message. So let's look at an example of a person who's a good orator. I'm not pulling up a doctor. I'm not pulling up a researcher. I'm not pulling up the kind of person that you've probably sat politely in an audience and listened to speak at a podium. Who are good public speakers? Politicians, actors and actresses, musicians, performers, people that are used to engaging people. And they're used to engaging people without crutches of PowerPoint presentations and notes in front of them. So I'm bringing us back to the 60s. I wasn't around then, but I've heard the tales, and I've heard the tales because there were so many great orators, especially in the 60s. And one example of one great orator, of one great speech, was a speech that Kennedy gave back in 1961 to try to convince Congress and America that we needed to enter the space race. And this had to do with the Cold War and Russia and national pride and all kinds of things. So important. And what did he say? One of the pieces that he talked about, he said, I believe this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth. Boom, right? This is a speech that has been spoken so many times since then, watched so many times, and this speech helped to reframe the next decade. So Trevor and I decided that we're going to have the exact same level that we're going to shoot for this talk, and no less. So how did we decide we're going to approach this? So we got together and started brainstorming ideas. What do people want to hear about? What do we want to talk about? What are some things that are important in giving a good talk? What are the pitfalls that people fall into? And I'm not going to read this whole thing to you. I know, because I've given some talks, that you're already reading it, and I'm already competing with myself with the words that I'm saying and the words that I've put up on the board. But right now my voice is winning because I can speak more clearly than I write. So good luck if you're trying to get through my handwriting and get ahead of what I'm about to say. But this is what we did. We came up with things. So we talked about making the talk accessible in every sense of the word, make it understandable, as well as being able to have a lot of different people being able to appreciate what we're trying to talk about. We talked about being engaging, not boring, being on time. You can kind of see this here if you can see my mouse, right? And a good citizen of the conference. So some of the things that you folks mentioned and some of the things that we've seen. So we tried to anticipate some needs and deal with things that we've had experience with people having trouble with in the past. So we came up with this list, and it was way too much stuff. And that's great. That's one piece of the brainstorming. Another piece of the brainstorming is we started to tie this way too much stuff linearly, disorganized, total, just a total brainstorming session into themes and ideas. So one of the themes was what a big idea would be. Another theme was the audience interfacing with the talk itself and engaging people. And then we sort of branched out from that and thought about this other thing in parentheses on the top left-hand side. Well, what about interactivity with engaging the audience, question and answer or other gimmicks? Is there a way to spontaneously do some of this? Is there a way that you could design some of it? What about knowing the audience, knowing what the schedule and the program is, knowing what the needs of your audience are? What tools do we have at our disposal? PowerPoint, Zoom, Keynote, etc. And what about speaking itself? How do you speak on Zoom? How do you present yourself? What about your audiovisual needs? How do you use your head voice when you're speaking so you don't stress your vocal cords? All these different things, confidence and practice. Physical things like mics and cables and connections and backups and lighting, right? So we tied all these things together into some themes, and this is something that you can do on a whiteboard. This is something you can do on pieces of paper, but it's really important. We haven't made a single slide yet. We were collecting our thoughts. And this is the messy piece, right? This is what artists refer to as the messy phase, where it's like they started off with a sketch and they're starting to layer the undertones of paint, and it doesn't look like anything yet, and it's ugly. Or if you're into the comic sort of like figure design art like I am, this is where the pencil sketches are just like, you don't know what's going on, and they're correcting the angles and trying to set out the tone. Storyboarders are doing this, and they've just got boards all over the place, and they're trying to figure out which thing is going to go first and which thing's going to go last, and it's a mess. And eventually you start to bring some order out of the chaos. But this is what the board looked like. In fact, if you don't believe me, go to the second floor. It's probably still up on the whiteboard down there. And we came up with this. We're like, all right, we've got enough stuff here to make this talk. And one key thing actually at this phase was we got too much stuff. And this is the time to have too much stuff, because we very consciously said to each other, at this point, we're not going to try to figure out how to cram all of this into a talk. We're going to try to figure out what are the most important concepts in here that we think we need to convey and organize them in a way that's going to make sense. We can't be linear about this. What are we going to say at 5 minutes and at 10 minutes and at 15 minutes until we went through the mess? And what happened next was we started to clean this up a little bit. And as we came up with the mind mapping, we would bring things from the list into the mind map. And then mind mapping made us add more things to the list. So we went around and around like this and spent not a lot of time. A big percent of our time was spent on this, but even spending 20 or 30 minutes on this is huge. So we're not engaging with any media yet. This is just getting thoughts down. And then once we had that, we were able to go to the left side of the screen here, where we could say like, all right, our central theme is going to be interactivity between the message and the audience. How do we communicate that? How do we respond to the audience? How does the audience respond to the message? That's going to be the big picture that we're trying to paint. So we're going to start with that. This is a primer, and this is the time in the talk that I'm going to talk about that. We're going to mention a lot of concepts that we're not expecting that we're going to go and take a deep dive into, but hopefully you'll get some either inspiration to read more about this or some references that you can explicitly learn more about this. This isn't meant to be the only thing that's going to change your speaking style. Then we're going to talk about some big picture things that have to do with the interaction between the message and the audience. And that's largely going to be my piece where I talk about crafting your message. And then Trevor's going to take over and talk about some practical tips and bring it back down to home where we are grounded. And ending off with some resources and some next steps and hopefully a call to action for you guys to hopefully take something from this and apply it to your own talks, or through the questions and answers at the end, we can have a great discussion where we can all learn from each other, because there's nobody on here that I haven't heard give a great talk about something at some point where I haven't learned something from. So again, we have this central theme, the big picture, the message, and now this makes a lot more sense. And this is the time when we have it simplified to just 4 or 5 points that we can rearrange it. If we don't like the way it looks, we go back to the mind map, we go back to the brainstorming, but this is the central thing, the framework around which the rest of the talk is built. And then we can brainstorm a couple of more ideas and then get a little bit more specific. So crafting a central message, what does it mean when we talk about made to stick, the success mnemonic? And we're talking about this now for 2 different reasons. One is this is how we came up with the ideas for this talk. And 2, I'm using a technique called foreshadowing to create a bit of suspense in you, the audience, because you're wondering, what is he talking about? What's success? What is made to stick? I'm very curious about this. What does this have to do with duct tape? You'll see in a moment, but I'm not going to tell you yet. So, and again, we had some more ideas for practical tips in Zoom, and then we broke it down because there's so much you can talk about, right? And Trevor, maybe you want to chat a little bit about this, but like, you know, there's a million tips and tricks. So what did we talk about to like make it not just a litany of little tips and tricks like the appendix of a book, but organize this around some central themes?
Yeah, you know, sticking with the theme of this talk being quite meta, we really wanted to stick with, you know, what is the goal of the practical tips? And we started with saying, okay, we've got a big idea. And the second part, which I'm going to talk about in about 5 or 10 minutes, is how do we convey it? So every sort of practical tip that I'm going to be talking about soon is going to be something that conveys the big idea. It's something that conveys the central message. There's a lot of, you know, tips and tricks that you can use on Zoom, sort of like, you know, having somebody that mutes participants if they're making too much noise. That's an important practical tip. That's not going to be on my big list because that's not necessarily something that conveys our big message. So as we kind of went through everything, we said, all right, what helps with that message and what gets it through? And that's what I'm going to be talking about in about 10 minutes or so.
So this is what that looked like, that slightly more detailed version. And by the time we got to here, we were pretty close to starting an outline of slides. And this is what the room looked like when we were done. So we have a timeline. We gave ourselves 30 minutes or so, and we have our big picture. We have the pieces that go together. And again, this is the time when you're going to rearrange those pieces to make them make sense. Once you've committed yourself to slides, it's like committing yourself to paragraphs when you write an essay. It's human nature to be reluctant to give up that work. So it's much better to focus for a longer time on the outline and make sure that the big picture makes sense before you start committing to the details of the prose. And similarly, it's much better before you waste 2 hours coming up with a slide that you later realize isn't really keeping in theme and doesn't make sense. You're going to be reluctant to give it up. So it's much better for you to start with what you're looking for. So what we're looking for is this. And how did this work for JFK, right? So JFK said these words in 1961, and he's got some notes and he's got a microphone, and he's got no he has no PowerPoint slides. So he's using his words to create a vision in people's minds because he had an incredibly clear vision. And when you hear those words about before the decade is out, landing a man on the moon, returning him safely to Earth, this is what you're thinking about. And as those words are spoken, this is what's capturing the imagination of the audience, what captured the imagination of a nation, bringing them safely to Earth. And that's one of the things that just changed the world at that point. So that sounds good. Change the world. That sounds like a beautiful idea that we can build a talk around. And the more you think about it, though, maybe that's a little too much, right? Let's not bite off more than we can chew and think too highly of ourselves. We're not really trying to change the world, Trevor and I, not at least with this talk. Maybe we're trying to improve communication. That's still a good big picture, but maybe a little bit more manageable. And even when you start to chip away at that, maybe we can make it even simpler. There's 2 steps. We need to have a central message and convey it. Well, now we're getting into something that's simple, it's digestible, it's concrete, and it even calls back to the beginning of what we started talking about in the beginning of the talk. So there's a way, and that seems reasonably natural, and I think it came to us pretty naturally just in terms of how we went through a thought process. But there's actually some evidence and data and studies about how this is done. And there's a great book by Chip and Dan Heath called Made to Stick. And it talks about what are the ideas that seem to stick? What makes something more accessible to people, more memorable to people? How do you craft a message that's going to resonate with people? And there's this mnemonic success. And it starts with simple. We're going to land a man on the moon. Unexpected. We're going to land a man on the moon? Concrete. Man. Moon. Credible. I'm John F. Kennedy, the president of the frickin' United States. I'm telling you that we can take a person and put them on the moon and then bring them back down again, right? And then emotional and stories, right? And the rest of it sort of explains itself. So the idea is this really hits all those buttons. And if you're thinking about crafting a message from one human to another, we have to think about how our primate brains are organized a little bit in terms of storytelling, in terms of novelty, in terms of something we can wrap our minds around. And those are the kinds of messages that are going to stick. Then we need to think about how we're going to convey that message. And that's where Marshall McLuhan back in the 60s talked about the medium is the message. So in other words, if I'm trying to give a talk about a topic, how I would write a song about that topic is a little bit different than how I would sculpt about that topic or do interpretive dance on that topic or write a book about that topic. So what that means for us is depending on what message you're trying to get across, you have a lot of different tools at your disposal to get that message across. It's not always a lecture. It's not always bedside teaching. In fact, if you want to think about this as some kind of crazy control panel, we've got things like problem-based learning, lectures, and if it's going to be a lecture, which different format are we going to use? A hands-on workshop, simulation. You can tweet it or use social media. You can have a Socratic method, in which in this case is set up as easy, medium, or harsh. It can be a podcast. It could be a field trip. What an amazing field trip there was today at Resident Conference, where our guest lecturer who gave a grand rounds talk literally biked around her neighborhood live on Zoom, showing us all the different poisonous and medicinal plants around her environment. That was amazing. So there are all these different tools, and I think you need to think carefully about which tool is really the best one to use for the thing that you're trying to convey. And then you actually have to convey it. And a lot of that has to do, and this is just a broad brushstroke of like, what's your speaking style? How do you engage with people? Are you like knowledgeable, subject expert, sort of controlled speech and calm in the storm sort of thing? Are you frenetic and crazy and engaged like Robin Williams here? Are you just passionate and powerful and authoritative like Maya Angelou? Like what is your style? And you need to find your own voice. And I think in doing so, in looking for that, you're going to need to look to the people who have inspired you. And has it been a poet? Has it been a performer? Has it been a politician? And maybe it was a mentor. Maybe you did go to a great lecture. Maybe there was someone who taught you in grammar school, in high school, in college, in medical school. But whoever inspired you, I encourage you to think about and really break down a bit, like, why was it? What was it about them that was so engaging? And how can I mimic that? And when we talk about actually working the slides and getting the presentation itself together, I highly recommend Presentation Zen. There is a website called Presentation Zen. It's also a book. And I'll just show you a really quick example from Presentation Zen. I'd like you to look at this picture for a minute while we all think, who isn't unmuted? And everybody's going to think for a second together, gosh, I wonder if I'm muted. And I'm going to look. Okay, thank you. So, because it wasn't me. So here we've got a central message, right? And yesterday was Star Wars Day, and although I still wish upon all of you that the Force will be with you, this is just a really great example where there's a presentation happening, right? And what a crazy thing that in the middle of a big budget science fiction movie, one of the greatest directors and screenwriters of the 80s and 90s decided that they were going to have a break in the action to have a slide presentation, right? That's insane. So you better darn well know what the heck you're doing if you're going to take a break in a big budget summer blockbuster to have a slide presentation. So what's the big central message of General Dodonna's presentation here? There's a defect in the Death Star that we can use to our advantage. So this whole screen is all about that central message. So when you have a central message, you're not only communicating that verbally, you're not only communicating the thought process that there's a central message and leaving that with your audience, but it informs your design. I'm going to make sure that every slide has one point. So here, this is part of the picture of the Death Star. Here is a slide that doesn't have a central point, right? This is the classic death by PowerPoint. There's graphics, there's text, there's bullets, there's a lot of information happening here. There's no central theme from this. I'm not going to remember what I'm supposed to know from this slide. And George Lucas would never do this because he actually knows what he's doing. He's one of many people who actually know what they're doing. So why would we fall down a trap to do it the wrong way when the people who engage us the most do it totally differently? This example, by the way, is from Presentation Zen. So let's take a look at what usually stares you in the face when you're about to put your talk together in PowerPoint. Before you even start, you've lost. This slide has no central theme. And if you fill out all the little bullet points that it seems to be asking you to do, you will then also have no central theme. You will have no point, you'll have a lot of data on the screen, and you'll have a harder time making sure that your voice is only supported by your slides instead of the slides leading you. That's not to say not to use PowerPoint. This very talk was made in PowerPoint. PowerPoint's just a hammer. You can do a lot of different things with a hammer. So make sure that you're using the tools in a way that's going to support you. And again, having that central message informs your design as much as it informs your content. If you follow that slide blindly, you're going to wind up with something like this. This is a typical kind of slide that an ultrasound geek like me would use, right? Here's a slide about anatomy. I want to talk about the uterus. I want to highlight the yolk sac. The yolk sac is supposed to be the point of this slide. How much slide real estate have I given to the picture of the yolk sac? It seems like it's the biggest picture on the screen, and it is, but just think for a minute, step back and see that the entire real estate of the screen compared to the amount of real estate I've given to that image is probably 20%. So I'm taking 20% of the available space and using only that much to say my main point, where I could do this. And this is just one simple example of how you can make some of your slides, especially if there's a visual cue there, so much more simple and so much more powerful and direct people exactly where you want them to be. Here, for example, is a set of slides that I made when I was giving a talk that I was trying to do a good job with when I was a resident. And there's a lot of information here, and it's a very typical knowledge translation. I'm trying to spit out a chapter to you. And what I've done is I've taken a thing that I didn't know very much about, in this case, cyanide toxicity, and became a subject matter expert in it. And now I will tell you about how much I learned. And this, you could just tell this is going to be a terrible talk and it's going to be boring because I can just look at this 30,000-foot view. Imagine if you looked at the storyboard of a movie and the entire movie took place in an elevator, right? Now, people do that sometimes. There's a thing called a bottle episode on a TV show where they want to spend no money and they just have everything in a short period of time and a limited budget, and they save more money for like the season finale or a trip to Hawaii. Fine, there's a reason for that sometimes, but this is not going to work. Whereas this is an overview of the slides for this talk. And you can tell just from, like, again, that 30,000-foot level that it's a little more interesting. So it's a good way to double check where you're going. And I also like to live in this view because this is the view that allows me to rearrange things and change my ideas around way more easily than when I think about it linearly and I get stuck too far into the talk. So in closing up my section here, I'd like for you to think that really the purpose of coming up with a central message is for you to take a hard concept and then make it easy for you because you've become a subject matter expert. And that's really important, but it's only the next to last step. The last step and the difference between a good talk and a great talk is making that thing that's hard easy for your audience. You've all been to talks where someone sounds really smart and you're like, wow, they really know a lot about a particular topic. That's great. And that's okay. And that, is very commonly what someone's first big talk is going to be like. For example, as much as the residents put in like an enormous amount of effort into their talks, a lot of times the senior talk is this kind of talk. Like, I've become an expert in something and now I'm going to tell you about this thing. And that's great. And that's the talk I gave as a resident as well. And that's a talk we see at a lot of conference. If you walk away thinking the person is smart, they did a decent job. The next level is they make that topic easy for you so that you say, I can't wait to do an ultrasound on my next shift. I can't wait to read an EKG. I can't wait to see my next weak and dizzy patient. They made it seem so easy. And that's the great talk. That and think about that, and without overblowing this too much, although I can overblow things sometimes. Think about that benefit to society. If there's a thing that you have to invest 20 or 30 hours into to get pretty good at, and you've done that work, and then you can translate that into helping other people become good at it in half an hour, and you do that service to humanity for 20, 50, 100 people. Think about the amount of hours that you've saved your entire audience. They don't have to go into this for 20 or 30 hours. They come out of a talk from you from 20 or 30 minutes, and they've leapt ahead. And then they can go back and learn more and read more. Maybe it's just the beginning for them. But that's the point of this. That's why there's still value in 2021 in having presentations and giving talks. It's not dead. And that's the responsibility that you take on when you do this sort of thing. And I hope that helps you think about why having a clear message and then conveying it to people, taking something that's hard and making it easy, can be so unbelievably powerful. So again, I want to leave you with the fact that we need a message, and it's got to be the core of what your talk is going to be about. And I'm going to turn it over to Trevor to talk about some ways to bring us back down to earth a little bit and talk about how we're going to actually do this.
All right, now that you are all inspired, you know how to make a core message, I am going to talk about some of the concrete things that you can do to convey that message to your audience. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to start with a slide that you just recently saw, and I'm going to take the text away, and I'm going to point a couple of things out. I'm going to point out the multiple redundant unidirectional mics that are on the stage. I'm going to point out the very deliberate background here. I'm going to point out the nice lighting that you can see on our speaker's face. And I'm going to point out the podium that's hiding some notes down at the bottom here. So even the best moments in history required a little bit of a physical setup beforehand. And it wasn't just totally about the core message, even though that's absolutely a prerequisite. So I'm going to talk about these concrete things and how you can do that yourself. So I'm going to start by talking about physical setup. And this is going to be focused really on Zoom because, you know, that's the thing we've been doing for the last year. And I think we're going to be doing it for a lot longer. There's a lot of benefits of Zoom that I'm not going to get into today, but we're going to be using Zoom for years and years and years to come, or something similar. So the first thing I want to bring up, and this is a really easy one, is when you open up your Zoom client, I want you to click right here and check for updates. If you don't have the most common version of Zoom or the most compatible version of Zoom and most updated version, you're going to be missing out on a lot of stuff. So that's an easy one. It takes a couple of seconds. Check for updates as soon as you're done with this talk, and make sure you're running the most up-to-date version of Zoom. We're going to start with backgrounds because everybody uses different backgrounds. And we're going to do that from the settings button up here. So if you click on the settings and then you go to background and filters, if you have the most up-to-date version of Zoom, you can hit this button right here, blur. It's only on the newest version. And I think it's a really nice way to just sort of mute your background and make it not distracting. You know, it's fine if you want to set up a background that you think is sort of neutral and non-distracting. But if you're not in a place where you can do that, then set up a blur, then you don't have to worry about anything else. If you want, you can add your own backgrounds. You can add your own pictures, whether it's a JPEG or whatever you want, by clicking this little plus button in the corner right here. And then you can make really fun backgrounds, and you can kind of do whatever you want and add a little bit of levity to your talk. You may also notice there's a button down at the bottom of settings that says, I have a green screen. If you've never clicked that button before, or if you don't have access to that button, it might be because you're running an old version of Zoom, but it doesn't have to be a green screen. It just has to be a background that's a different color from your skin tone, your hair color, and whatever you're wearing, so that there's a contrast. Green is the obvious answer to that because it's usually a contrast to everything, but be careful with green screen and really only use it if you do have something contrasting, or you're going to end up with something like this, which is really not going to be very useful for you or anybody else. This also requires a lot of bandwidth, and we're going to talk about that in a minute as well to be mindful of. So one thing that I've recently started using in some of my lectures to medical students, and has been really popular, is PowerPoint as virtual background. I'm going to give you a quick demonstration on this as well. So everybody knows about the share screen button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you click on share screen and then go up here to the top and click on advanced instead of basic, you're going to get these 5 options, and you can click on PowerPoint as a virtual background. And I'm going to stop sharing for 1 minute or just 1 second so I can show you a demonstration of this. So I'm pulling up PowerPoint as a virtual background now. There's some benefits of this and there's some drawbacks of this. But here you go. Now, the PowerPoint slide that you just saw is actually my background. And you should see me down in the bottom corner overlaying the background. Does anybody not see that? Hearing nothing. The downside of this.
That looks good.
The downside of this is that you can't use PowerPoint in a sort of robust way. You can't necessarily annotate it the way that I was just drawing and writing little red lines on things, but it can be a lot of fun, and it can be really engaging for your audience, because this allows you to sort of take a more front and center position on your slides. But you have to be really cognizant of your slide design as well. So you have to either avoid putting things down in the corner, or, and I think this is a lot more fun, you can actually create something on your screen where you kind of fit. So this is a great way to sort of create a fun, interactive, sort of lighthearted talk. Just make sure you're not using this to distract. And I'm only going to leave this up for a couple more seconds, and then I'm going to jump back into my original slides. All right. So going back. And I do have the chat up. If anybody has any questions, feel free to throw those in. Okay. Oops. Sorry, this is what I'm not supposed to do. This is supposed to be at the very beginning. Here we go. Okay. So I do only recommend using that if you don't have any sort of advanced stuff in your PowerPoints. The PowerPoint animations and things like that are not going to show up if you use it as a virtual background, but it is kind of fun. This is, I think, a great use of virtual background. This is a talk that I gave at Cord recently, and this is a really text-heavy slide. I'm going to defend myself a little bit by saying that they only allowed me 3 slides for my presentation, so they had to put everything on this one. But you can see that I created a space in the bottom corner where I just sort of overlaid myself. So instead of just presenting like a poster would be, I was actually in the presentation. So this was something I did to record an 8-minute talk and then submit it. And I think it's a nice way of sort of injecting yourself into the talk and giving it a little bit of sort of humanity instead of just reading off slides. So use it when appropriate, not every time. This is also something, Brett mentioned this a little bit earlier, where you can use the portability of Zoom to actually enhance your talk. We did have a lecture today by a toxicologist who walked through her garden with her phone. You can increase the sort of quality of your video by actually connecting a camera to a laptop and moving that around with you. You can either do that as a stationary video to really increase the quality, or you can carry it. Both Nikon and Canon both have this capability, so you can just go to their websites individually and download that utility. I'm not going to walk you through that because it's a little outside the scope of this talk, but I wanted to make sure people knew it was possible, because it does create really, really high quality images and allows you to do nice presentations. I talk about lighting very quickly. So this is a really, really cool photograph, right? This is a great photo.
Trevor, I think your slides are not advancing.
Oh, they're not.
We're still stuck on the PowerPoint as a virtual background.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on. 1 second, then I'll reshare. Thank you. Sorry about that, guys. All right, are you seeing my lighting slide now? A backlit couple jumping in Central Park?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. I apologize. So I'm just going to pick up from here then to talk about lighting briefly. This is great and cool for a wedding photo. This is not great for Zoom. And we've all kind of seen folks who are either lecturing or participants in a lecture where there's a lot of backlighting. Backlighting is, I think, can people see this? I'm just getting a message that they might not be able to. Brett, can you confirm?
Yeah, we can see you're in like editing mode for the slides. You're not in presentation mode. Maybe that's why they're not advancing.
Okay, one moment. I wish I could say this was a gimmick, but it is not. We actually talked about how this is very likely to happen. Okay, here we go. I've had so many different PowerPoints and Zooms open today, and I haven't really known which was which. So I think I know what's going on. Okay. Everything is cleaned up. Last but not least. All right. Everything normal now?
Yeah, it's still in like edit mode though. It's not in the slide. It's not in presentation mode. It's not in slideshow mode.
How about now?
No.
Can people still see the slides though?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to just continue on and push forward with this as long as you can see the slides. I'm sorry about that. Can you see my annotations? Can you see what I'm drawing on the slides?
We did before, yes.
Okay. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to jump off of this and come back. Brett, can you entertain the crowd for about 30 seconds and I'll be back?
Of course.
Thank you.
So earlier, Elaine was asking what people would bring if they were kidnapped by aliens. I think I'll avoid that same question. But while we're in between talking about big picture and practical stuff, what are some things that people specifically have had challenges with? Now's a good time to get yourself off mute. I was harassing whoever was in a noisy environment before, and I've been that guy, so don't worry about it. But what are some things that you want to make sure that we chat about?
Well, I think this is really very provocative because I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is getting too much material on a slide and everything gets lost. And your point of it being really bulleted and insisting focus on the speaker, just a great point.
So practically, where do you put your, when you do things like this, where do you put your speaking notes to keep you cued and on task?
So, so there's a challenge with Zoom where if you have two monitors, you can share only the presentation monitor, and then the other monitor can be your speaker notes, just like, you know, PowerPoint or your Keynote also can have like presentation mode where one is your notes and one is your slides. So if you have two screens, you can do that. If you don't have two screens, there isn't a way that I'm aware of in PowerPoint at least to have your notes visible only to you while the slides only are visible to other people. So you either have to have like old-fashioned notes, or you have to have another screen open next to you with some of your notes. And it can even be like another iteration of your slides that you can kind of scroll through as you go along. So if you've got like a wider screen, you can get away with doing that. So it's not as seamless as when you have like a laptop plugged into a conference presentation that you can look at your notes on your laptop, and then it's speaker notes. So
but this is actually a perfect transition.
Yeah. Oh yeah, because this is supposed to be meta, right? So like I just wrote down like 4 or 5 things that I wanted to make sure I talked about with you guys because I knew they wouldn't be visible on my own slides.
I'm a shill.
You can do Google. You can do Google presentation too.
You can do that. You can also use in the advanced settings that we have up right now, you can do only a portion of the screen. So if you set up the speaker notes, the way you normally would if you were presenting in person. You can actually just select portion of screen, which is right here, and you can only select the portion that is what you want them to see. So your notes are off to the side. I don't have a demo of that right now, but I would encourage you to sort of play around with this. You can set up a Zoom meeting sort of by yourself and experiment with this a little bit, but the portion of the screen will work for what you're looking for, Kevin.
Okay, thank you. I'd also be interested in like how you like to prepare your speaker notes, like how complex or how do you prompt yourself to remember the key points?
Yeah, I have moved away from speaker notes entirely because I do just sort of like having the presentation in front of me, but Brett probably has a different approach to that.
I was, so when I was in high school, I wasn't really on the I wasn't on the debate part of the team. I was on like extemporaneous speaking, where you like make up a talk as you go along, and I loved the fact that I didn't use notes. I was really proud of myself. And when I would give talks, especially early in my career, I was like, notes are for babies. I'm not going to use any notes. Like, I'll show them what's what, and it was fine, right? Because I would put a talk together and I'd have a picture of like a dog's tail, and I knew I had some funny story to tell about that. And then there'd be a picture of like, a banana. I was like, all right, great. And it was fine. I didn't need any speaker notes. And then I got older and I would come across a talk that I hadn't given in a year or two. And I was like, why is there a banana? Why is that? What does this have to do with anything? And I didn't remember what the heck I was trying to talk about at that point. And all the genius, I'm sure it was great. And it got big laughs in the auditorium and everything was great. And people like, oh, great job. That was banana slide was awesome. And I had no idea what the heck I was doing. So now I put just the gist. I just put a couple of, points about the banana on the slide in the notes, but I definitely don't write out the prose as if I was going to read it, because as soon as you get into reading stuff, it's a totally different mindset, and it becomes very stiff, and it's really hard to read essentially off a teleprompter. It takes a lot of skill, and politicians tend to be the ones to do this, and newscasters, when they're reading off a teleprompter, to make that look natural is really hard. So if that's your shtick, or if you have like, I only have 3 minutes, I'm doing a specific talk, and it's like incredibly well timed, and every period and every sentence has to be mapped out, and you write it in a way that it can sound organic, and you practice reading it that way, that's great. But for me, it's just like a couple of big points that I want to make sure that I get to in each slide.
All right. I'm going to blow through some slides very quickly now because I want to keep people on time, which, going back to our original point, I want to be early. So I have the slides up on my phone right now so I can kind of see what you're saying at this point. I'm going to talk about lighting for just a few more seconds. And what I want to really impress upon you is to get one of these. This is what I use. It was about $20, and this allows me to sort of create a light temperature that I want, and also allows me to direct light the place that I want to direct it. Backlighting is fine. You may notice there's actually a light right behind my head right now, but the thing is my body is actually blocking all of it. So it kind of creates more of a silhouette than it distracts from the actual glare and focus on my face. And I do have a ring light in front of me. We've all seen, the picture on the right-hand side where you have this bad lighting with a window behind you and no light in front of you. And then we've all seen the good lighting where you have a light in front of you. I'm going to change my actual light temperature right now, and you can kind of see what it does to my face. You see up in the corner, this is a cool lighting, and then this is warm lighting. You can kind of set the mood of your talk a little bit. Warm is definitely a little bit more inviting and casual, and cool is a little bit more energetic. You should really shoot for neutral though, somewhere right in the middle of the spectrum right here. This is kind of what you're going for Zoom, and it's optimized for that as well. I also recommend getting a microphone. Notice Brett is wearing a microphone. I have one in front of me right here. This is just going to help in terms of your audio quality, especially for recordings. There's lots of different types of microphones. If you're in a noisy environment, you want to try to get a unidirectional mic. And if you're in a loud, quiet environment, it doesn't really matter as long as it's something quality. But really, you can pick up a ring light and a microphone for maybe $10 or $15 each on Amazon and have it delivered to your house the next day. So I think it's a good investment to make. And the last piece of physical setup that I recommend doing is, especially if you're in a new setting, just go to Google and type in internet speed and make sure that your internet has enough quality to give you a good connection. If you just type this in, you're going to get these two pieces of information. You're going to get your download speed and you're going to get your upload speed. The one that matters more is your upload speed. The download speed needs to be somewhere between 20 and 50, which is pretty normal for most high quality internet connections. But the upload speed is going to be a little bit limiting for some people. At minimum, you want to have 1 to 2 megabytes per second in order to get good upload and get good quality of your presentation on the internet. If you're only hovering around 1 or 2, you want to make sure nobody else in your house is using the internet for any sort of high volume uploading or downloading. So if people are watching Netflix or Hulu, ask them to slow down during that time. And if you have a teenager in the basement who's mining Bitcoin, maybe just turn off the servers for a couple of minutes and make sure you get your bandwidth back. In terms of slide design, I'm going to move away from physical stuff for a moment. This is sort of the really quick and easy way to improve your slide design. And this is not something I necessarily recommend, but if you don't have a lot of time, when you open up PowerPoint, there's an option at the top with design where you can just click on design ideas, and PowerPoint is actually going to create a suggestion for you. It's going to be okay. It's not going to be great, but it's going to be okay. And it's going to be a lot more interactive and sort of dynamic than just a bullet point list. So this is an example of that. And this is what I'm going to be talking about in the next couple of slides. I want you to consider a pre and post reading handout. I want your slides to augment your speech, not duplicate your speech. I want you to use the whole slide, which is something that Brett mentioned earlier, but repetition is important. And I also want you to pay attention to color. So, this slide is okay. It's not great, but it's better than a bullet point list, right? So if you don't have a lot of time, hit the little slide design button, let PowerPoint do the work for you. This is an example of something that I created for a lecture I gave in the medical school. This was a one-pager that I sent out a week ahead of time so the students could read it, that contained all the information that I didn't want to spend time covering before I gave them an EKG lecture. So they could look at it, they could refer to it, they could print it out, they could put it on their phone. And that way I could just dedicate my slides to things like this. Very clean, very simple, but the information that I wanted them to have supplementary to that, they already had in a PDF form. You can also consider using a post handout. If you're just trying to get the information across to someone and you don't feel like your slides are, capable of doing that on their own, just send it out afterwards, and that's okay too. Similar to Brett, this is a talk that I gave during residency that I'm, a little embarrassed about now. But you can see it's almost like a book, right? It's just a series of words. There might be 1 or 2 slides on here that involve a little bit of color and a little bit of dynamism, but for the most part, this is just text, and it's not the best way to get your point across. I'm going to pull out one slide in particular that's sort of incredible, which is this one. This slide, going back to the central theme, this slide is a great slide if you're trying to make someone realize what a bad slide is. This slide is not a great slide if your point is actually what's on the slide and having someone look at it, because the first thing that your learner or your audience is going to think is, I'm overwhelmed and I can't read that. So if that's the point, that's amazing and that's wonderful, and that's the point you should be making on this slide. So maybe there is some utility to a slide like this, but this slide is still a lot better. Oh, I think I lost it. This slide is still better than something condensed, right? It's still using all of its space, at least. Can anyone read the yellow bar at the bottom, by the way? What's in there?
Nursing home.
Yeah, I'm really impressed at your vision. I had trouble reading that, which means maybe I have a little bit of color blindness. And that's actually my next point, and we'll close out in a couple of seconds here. But when you're giving a talk, and you're giving a talk to a very large audience, it's important that you give that talk in a way that's inclusive of everybody there. And a lot of people struggle with different sort of contrast or visual impairment issues. And there's a couple of things you can use online to help you design slides that create better contrast and are easier to see. Sim Daltonism is actually for Macs only, but you can download this and it'll create a filter on your screen that allows you to see what your colors will look like through different types of color blindness. And then Coblis, which is the color blindness simulator, allows you to upload slides and photographs and then apply filters to them on a web app. So both things to consider when you're building slides, just to make sure that you're using the right contrast and your slides are actually visible to everyone. Less important when you're giving a lecture to a really small group and you know everyone. Much more important when you're giving a lecture to 500 or 600 people at a national conference. And last but not least, I've got 3 minutes, presentation delivery. I encourage everyone to use the chat when they're giving lectures. And the easiest way to use the chat, instead of putting it on your screen and blocking things off, is to pull up chat on your phone. Just log in separately and have the chat window open on your phone. This is going to reduce the barrier to participation for a lot of people, and you're going to get more interactivity. Other thing you can do is use polls. You do have to activate polls in Zoom in order to do this, and a lot of people don't realize that. You just have to log into your actual Zoom account and turn on meeting polls, which will give you the option of doing this. Once you do that, you can then go into your meetings and create polls ahead of time. And I realize I'm moving through this pretty quickly, but that's also because I know this is being recorded and people can refer to this at a later point. But you can create your polls ahead of time. And then when you start your meeting, you're going to have this button down at the bottom. It says polling. You click that, your preset polls will come up and you can launch them. And this is great, but I think what's even more fun than the preset poll is using, and full credit to Ben Schnapp, who's an alumni of our program, who gave a lecture recently and did this. You can create sort of a live poll in front of you by going up to the top of the screen or having your audience go up to the top of the screen, clicking on annotate, and then using any one of these tools. The stamp tool works really nicely to annotate the screen and stamp on their selection. You can put a bunch of words on the screen. You can put different categories, like one thing on the right, one thing on the left, and have them stamp or write their name or do anything you want in that area to sort of vote for things and create a poll that way. I think this is a great interactive way to make this happen. Thanks, Brett. But you will notice that it's still on the screen because Brett needs to either clear that or I need to clear it. But you can do that by going to annotate and clear. Perfect, thanks. And the last point I'm going to make, it's 4:59. So the last thing I want to say is closed captioning is something that you can actually do in Zoom. There are third-party apps, but I think this is a really nice way of sort of adding text to an app, that isn't necessarily written on the screen. You have to go into settings as well and set this up. And then once you do that, closed captioning will appear at the bottom of your screen. And you can actually assign someone else in your meeting to type either closed captions, or you can use a third-party app, which is easy to do as well. So rush through the end a little bit. Oh, sorry, there's one more. If you are presenting at a big conference on somebody else's computer that you've never tested out, consider saving your presentation as a PowerPoint so that you don't have to worry about formatting issues. If you have a PowerPoint that goes onto somebody else's PowerPoint and they have a different version than you can lose all your formatting. Either practice or save as a PDF as just one last pearl. So thanks everybody for your attention. I'm sorry about the hiccups. Like I said, I wish that was a gimmick, but just goes to show how this is difficult for all of us. Just kind of tying things back to what Brett started with, you really want to start with a central theme that does take some effort and really should happen before you even start to build slides. You want to design your slide set and your speech to convey your message as best as possible. And the last piece, which we didn't really talk about, was feedback. You have to talk to your audience and see how your message came across, because every talk should be given more than once, and the first time you give it is going to be the worst time. Should be anyway. Brett, anything to add before we close off?
I think that was the perfect segue to turn it around to the group that it was so kind to join us here this afternoon, and see if anybody else has any other questions, any other things we didn't address today. If you are thinking of incorporating anything from this talk, what challenges do you see in doing so? Can we break any barriers for you to make an already great talk even better?
Yeah, just because I'm an ultrasound person, is it better to have the video embedded into the PowerPoint, or should you just be playing the, I don't know, like the video as a background or something?
So to me, so when I embed videos in the PowerPoint, I find that's easier. I automatically have those. I click off the couple boxes in PowerPoint that say play it full screen and loop until stopped. There's like a couple settings you need to mess with to make it work that way. And that makes it much easier for you to just talk while the video is playing in a continuous loop. If you want to do it that way, which is my favorite way to do it, and that's like kind of my default, then I think that works really well. If you're using a video that you want to fast forward and rewind, or like focus on a piece of it and go back and forwards, you know, whether it's ultrasound or some other video, if you're slowing something in slow motion or whatever, then it's probably better to share your when you share your screen, instead of sharing a presentation, share the app that you're using to play the video, QuickTime or Microsoft Movie Player or whatever it is, because then you have all the video controls.
And one really important adjunct to that too is when you share your screen, there's a little button at the bottom that says optimize for video. If you're playing a video, you're going to want to click that button so that it's a much smoother video. If you're not playing a video, don't click that button because it's actually going to decrease the resolution of your slides. But if you're going to play an ultrasound on YouTube or something like that, you're going to want to click that optimize for video button.
I'm also going to offer Trevor and me up to anybody that wants to like workshop things or go back and forth with ideas. I'll speak for both of us that we're not setting ourselves up as experts on this, but just people that are really interested in it. So, you know, just if anybody's working on a talk or wants to talk about content or slide design or anything, or just wants to have a, you know, a friendly audience to practice with, please reach out to us, because again, we're all in this together, and we're really interested in hearing all of the great stuff that everybody's putting together.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, well, thank all of you for spending some time with us this afternoon. We really appreciate your attention. Hopefully there was some useful stuff, and we're really looking forward to hearing more from everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a great day. Thanks.
Thank you.